There is a world just beyond our own, filled with stories so strange they defy all logic. Across America, ordinary places hold secrets of winged terrors, invisible forces, and things that vanish into thin air. This journey uncovers the most absurd paranormal cases ever documented, revealing the thin line between fear and fascination. You will discover the chilling truth behind legends that have haunted families and entire towns for generations. How could a simple farmhouse become the center of a national panic? What unseen intelligence tormented a family for years on a quiet ranch? What kind of mystery makes seasoned police officers question their own eyes? What is the strangest story your own town keeps hidden? A quiet town in West Virginia became the epicenter of a chilling mystery in the 1960s. The first reports described something impossible, a towering figure with massive wings and glowing red eyes. Witnesses driving near the abandoned TNT plant, a relic from the Second World War, were the first to see it. They spoke of a creature that rose from the shadows, a man-sized being that could keep pace with a speeding car and take to the air without a sound. This was the birth of the Mothman legend. The sightings piled up, creating an atmosphere of pure dread in Point Pleasant. People were not just scared, they were convinced this entity was an omen. Then, on a cold December evening in 1967, the Silver Bridge, choked with holiday traffic, gave way and plunged into the Ohio River. 46 people lost their lives in the terrible collapse. In the grief and shock that followed, the connection was instantly made. The winged terror had been seen near that very bridge. Was the Mothman a prophetic warning, a grim messenger trying to alert the town to the coming disaster? Skeptics have long argued that mass hysteria and a case of mistaken identity are to blame. They point to the sandhill crane, a large, red-faced bird that could, in a moment of panic and poor light, be transformed into a monster. But for those who looked into those piercing red eyes, no ordinary explanation has ever been enough. The Mothman was never seen again after the bridge fell, leaving behind a single, haunting question. Did it cause the tragedy, or did it simply see it coming? That single question ensured the Mothman would never truly disappear. The creature transcended its brief, terrifying appearances to become something far more enduring, an American icon. The legend found new life in books and on screen, most famously in a best-selling work that wove the sightings into a tapestry of ancient curses and government conspiracies, cementing its place in modern folklore. Every year, the town of Point Pleasant fully embraces its famous specter. The Mothman Festival draws thousands of curious visitors and dedicated believers to celebrate the mystery. They gather for guest speakers, browse vendor booths selling unique crafts, and gaze up at the massive, gleaming steel statue erected in the creature's honor. It is a strange and wonderful fate for a phenomenon born from pure fear. Yet beneath the celebration, the core debate remains as fierce as ever. Cryptozoologists, those who search for hidden animals, argue that the consistency of the eyewitness descriptions points to a real, unidentified creature. They propose it could be a rare bird or even a being from another dimension, something science has yet to classify. Skeptics, on the other hand, hold firm to their explanations. They point to the power of suggestion and the human brain's incredible talent for filling in blanks with familiar yet terrifying shapes. They ask if a town, already on edge from strange lights and unexplained activity, simply created the monster it needed to explain a feeling of impending doom. So what did all those people truly see on those dark West Virginia roads? The answer might be less important than the story itself. A winged enigma became a permanent part of the landscape, a comforting, if bizarre, piece of local identity born from tragedy. This pattern of a community forever changed by the unexplainable is not unique. Sometimes the paranormal does not just visit a town, it moves in, refusing to leave. Sometimes a house is more than just a home. In the quiet suburb of Amityville, New York, a handsome Dutch colonial house on the water became the setting for a story that would eclipse even the Mothman in its infamy. The terror began long before the Lutz family ever moved in. A year earlier, in 1974, Ronald DeFeo Jr., had murdered his entire family in that house. When George and Kathy Lutz purchased the property at a steep discount, they knew its grim history, but they believed they could make it their own. They were wrong. After just 28 days, the Lutzes abandoned everything they owned and fled, claiming the house had violently expelled them. The events they described were a catalog of the bizarre. Green, slimy fluid began to ooze from the walls and keyholes. Swarms of houseflies would materialize out of nowhere, clustering on windows in the dead of winter. Kathy Lutz reported being levitated from her bed, while George claimed he was physically changed, waking up each morning looking more like the portrait of a previous owner. The most chilling detail was a small, hidden closet, which they called the Red Room. This secret space, painted a garish crimson and reeking of decay, was supposedly the epicenter of the house's malevolent force, a place where the family dog would refuse to go. The story exploded into a media sensation, spawning a best-selling book and a blockbuster film. It seemed to be the ultimate haunted house case, a perfect storm of tragic history and fresh, first-hand accounts. But then the cracks began to show. The family's lawyer later admitted that he and the Lutzes had concocted much of the story over many bottles of wine. Key details like the infamous green slime were never corroborated by the police who had visited the home. Skeptics pointed out massive inconsistencies in the timeline and the physical claims. So was the Amityville Horror a complete fabrication, a cynical hoax designed for profit, or was there a genuine, terrifying experience at its core that the family then embellished for a public hungry for a ghost story? The controversy itself became the real haunting, an endless debate that ensures the house on Ocean Avenue will never be just a house again. This kind of story forces us to ask where the line is between a genuine fright and a story we choose to believe. The legal battles that followed the Amityville story were almost as bizarre as the haunting itself. The Lutz family and their lawyer, William Weber, found themselves in a bitter dispute. Weber, who had helped craft the original narrative, later admitted under oath that the entire tale was a hoax, a fictional story concocted with the Lutzes. He claimed they had spun the yarn over many bottles of wine, intending to write a book and split the profits. This shocking revelation seemed to be the final nail in the coffin for the case's credibility. Yet the Lutzes never recanted their core story. They maintained that something terrifying did happen to them in that house, even if the details were amplified for dramatic effect. This left everyone with an impossible choice. Were the Lutzes victims of a real paranormal event, or were they masterful storytellers who got caught in their own web? The publication of Jay Anson's book further muddied the waters. Anson, who never even interviewed the previous residents or the original investigating officers, presented the Lutzes' account as undisputed fact. His sensational writing style, filled with chilling and specific details, made for a gripping read, but it was riddled with factual errors that were easily disproven by police reports. For instance, officers who visited the home never witnessed the famous green slime oozing from the walls or the swarms of winter flies. Other families who lived in the house before and after the Lutzes reported nothing out of the ordinary. How could a haunting of such violent intensity simply vanish? The power of the Amityville Horror lies not in its truth, but in its perfect timing. It arrived in a cultural moment ripe for a modern ghost story, and its connection to a verifiable, gruesome murder gave it a chilling anchor in reality. The story was so compelling that it single-handedly reshaped the entire horror genre, inspiring countless books, films, and television shows that copied its blueprint of a family besieged in their own home. It became a cornerstone of paranormal lore precisely because its facts were so hotly disputed. The endless debate, the lawsuits, and the lingering questions have kept the legend alive for decades, ensuring that the house on Ocean Avenue remains a permanent fixture in our collective imagination. This leaves us with a profound puzzle about the nature of belief itself. When a story is this powerful, does it ultimately matter if it is true? A single story can redefine our entire understanding of reality. While Amityville questioned the nature of belief, another case would reach for the stars, introducing a terrifying new archetype into the American psyche. One late night in September of 1961, a mixed-race couple named Betty and Barney Hill were driving home to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, after a vacation in Canada. Their route took them through the lonely, dark stretches of the White Mountains. It was Betty who first noticed the light, a bright, unblinking star that seemed to be moving in a strange way. At first, they assumed it was a satellite or a small plane, but as it drew closer, its movements became impossible to ignore. Barney pulled over and, using a pair of binoculars, got a clear view of the object. It was a large, silent craft shaped like a pancake with rows of windows, and through those windows he saw figures staring back at him. Overcome with a primal fear, Barney yelled, "They are going to capture us," and he raced back to the car. They sped down the highway, but a series of strange, rhythmic beeping sounds seemed to vibrate through the trunk of their car. Then everything went quiet. They arrived home with no memory of the last 2 hours of their drive. Their watch had stopped. The trunk of their car had odd, concentric circles scraped into it. And the terrifying experience was just a blank space in their minds. Troubled by nightmares and growing anxiety, the Hills eventually sought help through hypnotic regression. Under hypnosis, a chilling, identical story emerged from both of them. They recalled being taken aboard the strange craft by non-human beings. They described a medical examination, the feeling of a long needle being inserted into Betty's stomach, and the beings communicating with them, not with words, but through a kind of direct mental transfer. They were shown a star map, which Betty later drew from memory, a map that some researchers would later claim pointed to the Zeta Reticuli star system. The story of the Hills was not just another UFO sighting. It was the first to introduce the core elements we now associate with alien abduction: the lost time, the medical procedures, the communication through thought. Their case exploded into the public consciousness, creating a template for thousands of similar accounts that would follow. It forced a difficult question onto a national stage. What is more frightening, the idea that we are being visited by beings from another world, or the possibility that our own minds can create such intricate, shared fantasies, complete with physical evidence we cannot explain? Betty Hill's hand-drawn star map became one of the most debated pieces of evidence in UFO history. An amateur astronomer later took her sketch and, using a complex computer model, claimed it matched a real star system known as Zeta Reticuli. This single detail transformed the story from a bizarre personal account into a potential cosmic roadmap, giving it a scientific veneer that captivated believers and infuriated skeptics. The map seemed to offer something tangible, a way to anchor a fantastic story in the real universe. But was it a genuine memory, or simply a case of a creative mind connecting random dots? The controversy over that map illustrates the case's deepest power. It gave people a framework, a set of specific, repeatable details that would echo in thousands of subsequent accounts. The story of the Hills did far more than frighten a nation. It created an entire mythology. Before their experience, flying saucers were distant lights in the sky. Afterward, the phenomenon became deeply personal and physically intrusive. The archetypes they introduced are now universal in abduction lore: the lost time, the paralyzing examination, the non-human beings with large, dark eyes, and the telepathic communication. Their case provided a narrative structure that other people, often struggling with their own fragmented memories, could recognize and use to make sense of inexplicable events. This blueprint was so powerful that it shaped every major abduction account that followed, from the Travis Walton case to the experiences documented by researchers like John Mack. The discourse around UFOs permanently shifted. The question was no longer just, are they out there? It became, what are they doing to us? This shift from external observation to intimate violation tapped into a profound new layer of cultural anxiety. The terror was no longer about technology we could not understand, but about a loss of bodily autonomy and the very sanctity of our own memories. How does a single story, whether true or not, rewrite the rules of reality for an entire society? The Hills never sought fame, and their quiet, credible demeanor made their account all the more unsettling. They left behind a legacy that is impossible to ignore, a foundational myth for the modern age that continues to challenge our understanding of the mind, the stars, and the unsettling space in between. While the Hills looked to the stars for answers, another family found their nightmare rooted firmly in the earth, on a remote Utah property where the very laws of nature seemed to break down. The Sherman family purchased what would become known as Skinwalker Ranch in 1994, dreaming of a quiet cattle operation. Instead, they walked into a concentrated barrage of the bizarre that defied every category of the paranormal. Their first encounters set the tone for years of terror. They witnessed a massive, wolf-like creature unlike any they had ever seen. It was far too large, its hide unnaturally thick, and it seemed to absorb the bullets they fired at it without so much as a flinch. The beast simply trotted away and vanished before their eyes. This was only the beginning. The family reported seeing portals tear open in the sky, disgorging strange, flying craft. Invisible forces would shake their home with violent intensity. They saw enormous, silent triangles floating over their fields and orbs of light that danced with intelligent purpose. Perhaps the most disturbing and recurring events were the cattle mutilations. Animals were found dead under impossible circumstances, with surgical precision cuts and their blood completely drained, all without a single track or drop of blood left in the surrounding soil. The phenomena seemed to be a cruel intelligence testing their sanity, adapting its horrors to whatever they feared most. The Sherman family endured this for 2 years before finally abandoning their dream, selling the ranch to billionaire Robert Bigelow. He did not want the land for cattle, he wanted it for science. Through his organization, the National Institute for Discovery Science, he launched a secretive, multi-million-dollar investigation, stationing a team of scientists and former military personnel on the property. Their findings, though largely kept from the public, were reportedly just as baffling. They documented radiation spikes, powerful magnetic anomalies, and equipment failures that had no logical cause. The real mystery of Skinwalker Ranch is not any single event, but the sheer concentration of every type of high strangeness in one location. It is as if the property itself is a doorway, and something on the other side is endlessly experimenting, probing the limits of reality and human perception. The scientific investigation only deepened the enigma, proving that the terror was not just in the minds of a single family, but was a measurable, persistent, and utterly absurd puzzle. What could possibly link shape-shifting monsters, advanced aircraft, and mutilated livestock under one lonely western sky? The scientific team from the National Institute for Discovery Science arrived at Skinwalker Ranch armed with more than just cameras and curiosity. They brought state-of-the-art equipment, from radiation detectors and magnetometers to thermal imaging scopes and motion-sensitive cameras. Their mission was to apply rigorous data collection to the chaos, to measure the madness. What they found was that the phenomena did not just continue, it seemed to actively engage with them. Equipment would fail at the most critical moments. One researcher described a powerful, invisible force that would shake their observation trailer so violently they feared it would be torn apart. Strange orbs of light would perform for the cameras, only to vanish the instant a new sensor was activated. It was as if the ranch itself was a living intelligence, one that enjoyed playing games with its observers. The data they did manage to capture was baffling. They recorded sudden, intense spikes in radiation with no identifiable source. Their magnetometers detected powerful, localized magnetic fields that would appear and disappear in an instant. On one occasion, a team member watched through a night vision scope as a large, dark, triangular craft drifted silently over field. The moment he radioed his colleagues to look, the object simply winked out of existence. The ranch was not just haunted, it was sentient and evasive. After years of investigation and spending millions of dollars, the Entity Side team packed up and left. They had collected volumes of data on impossible events, yet they had no definitive answers, only more profound questions. The ranch was then purchased by a new owner, an aerospace executive named Brandon Fugel, who reopened the investigation with even more advanced technology and a very public approach through a popular television series. Under his ownership, the core theories about the property have only grown more expansive. Some researchers propose the ranch sits atop a natural dimensional portal, a thin spot in reality where beings or energies from another plane occasionally bleed through. This could explain the shape-shifting creatures and the objects that appear and vanish without a trace. Others suggest it is a psychic hotspot, a place where human consciousness can physically manifest its deepest fears, effectively creating the very monsters it then flees from. Is the land itself somehow alive and aware, or is it a canvas upon which our own minds paint terrifying realities? The enduring mystery of Skinwalker Ranch is that after decades of scrutiny from terrified families and hardened scientists, it refuses to give up a single, satisfying answer. It simply asks us how much absurdity we are willing to accept before we redefine our understanding of the world. While science was probing the ranch in Utah, a far older American story shows that these forces have been with us for centuries, and they can hold a terrifyingly personal grudge. In the early 1800s, a farmer named John Bell settled with his family in Robertson County, Tennessee. Their life was one of hard work and simple faith until the day the noises began. It started with knocking on the walls and scratching at the doors, sounds that could have been dismissed as the wind or a stray animal, but soon the presence grew bolder. It began pulling the bed covers off the children at night and snatching the food right from their mouths. Then it found its voice, a faint, whispering breath at first. It grew into a clear, intelligent voice that could argue scripture, sing hymns, and spew profanity with equal skill. This was the entity that would become known as the Bell Witch, and it had a singular, vicious focus, the patriarch, John Bell. The witch's hatred for John was relentless. It would slap him in the face with an invisible hand, pull his hair, and curse his very existence, all while being perfectly pleasant and even playful with other members of the family, especially his daughter Betsy. The entity seemed to take pleasure in tormenting the girl, often leaving her bruised and exhausted from its nightly assaults. The family's plight became so famous that it drew the attention of a local war hero and future president, Andrew Jackson. Intrigued by the stories, Jackson assembled a party of adventurers and set out for the Bell Farm, vowing to silence the witch. According to legend, his journey hit an immediate, supernatural roadblock. His wagon suddenly stopped dead on the road, its wheels locked in place as if held by an immense, unseen force. After a long struggle, a mysterious voice whispered through the air, declaring that all was well and the wagon was suddenly freed. When Jackson finally arrived at the farm, his skeptical bravado was quickly humbled. One of his men, a braggart who claimed to be a witch hunter, was attacked in the night. The entity reportedly pinned him to his bed, repeatedly slapping him and tearing his clothes before tossing him from the room. Jackson and his party are said to have cut their visit short, fleeing the farm at first light. The witch's final act was its most chilling. It announced a specific prophecy that John Bell would sicken and die by a certain date. True to its word, Bell began to decline. He suffered from strange seizures and a swelling tongue that made it impossible for him to eat. One morning, he fell into a coma. His son went to fetch a bottle of medicine from the cupboard, only to find it had been replaced with a mysterious, dark liquid. When they tested it on the family cat, the animal went into convulsions and died. John Bell never woke up. The witch celebrated his death with singing and taunts, proclaiming its victory to the grieving family. It then promised to return in 7 years, and according to some accounts, it did, visiting Betsy Bell with a final, cryptic message before vanishing for good. The case of the Bell, which stands as one of the earliest and most detailed accounts of a sentient haunting in American history, it was not a mindless ghost, but a personality with motives, a cruel sense of humor, and a terrifying ability to predict and orchestrate the future. How does an invisible intelligence develop such a specific, human-like vendetta? The answer is lost to time, but the legend endures, a stark reminder that some hauntings are not about places, but about people. The American frontier was a world saturated with superstition and stark faith. The Bell Witch case did not occur in a vacuum, but erupted from a specific cultural soil where folk magic and rigid religious belief collided daily. Settlers in early 19th century Tennessee lived with the constant threat of disease, crop failure and isolation. In such an environment, the idea of a malicious, which was not a fanciful legend, but a plausible explanation for a family's sudden, inexplicable misfortune. The entity's own behavior, its ability to quote scripture and lead hymns, reflects this complex backdrop perfectly. It was a demon that knew its audience, using the language of faith to torment a devout family, making its attacks feel like a perversion of their deepest convictions. Modern analysts have looked back at the Bell family's suffering through a very different lens. Could the entire terrifying ordeal be explained by a case of mass hysteria? When a community is gripped by a shared, powerful belief, the mind can manifest physical symptoms, from phantom slaps to the sensation of being choked. The power of suggestion, especially on a young girl like Betsy Bell, could have been immense. Another, more physical theory points to the invisible killer known as carbon monoxide. A slow, undetected leak from a poorly ventilated fireplace or stove can cause hallucinations, paranoia, severe headaches, and even the feeling of a heavy pressure on the chest, symptoms that align chillingly well with the family's reported experiences. Yet, the most enduring and horrifying part of the legend remains the death of John Bell. The Bell Witch case stands almost alone in the annals of the paranormal, one of the very few stories where a supernatural entity is directly credited with causing a human death. The mysterious bottle of dark liquid that killed the family cat and preceded Bell's own demise adds a layer of tangible, physical evidence that ghost stories rarely possess. Whether the poison was administered by a human hand using the witch as a cover or by some unseen force, the outcome was tragically real. This single, fatal event elevates the tale from a spooky folktale to a genuine historical mystery. The Bell Witch's legacy is not just one of fear, but of a profound and unsettling question. Did an entire family and their community collectively imagine a monster so vivid it could kill a man, or did they stumble into a battle with something truly malicious, an intelligence that knew exactly how to break them? That question has echoed for 200 years, proving that some stories are far too powerful to ever die. In the shadow of these historical hauntings, a new kind of predator appeared, one that exploited our most fundamental fears without a single ghostly moan. Across America in the 1990s, a chilling pattern of reports emerged from seemingly safe suburban neighborhoods. The accounts were always the same. A woman would arrive at a family's door, alone and impeccably dressed in a conservative, dark suit. She identified herself as a social worker, flashing an official-looking badge and clutching a clipboard. Her manner was cold, professional, and unnervingly insistent. She claimed there had been an anonymous report of abuse or neglect, and she was there to see the children immediately. These visits were not random. They targeted families who were, at that very moment, home alone with their young kids. The so-called social worker would demand to be let in, often trying to peer past the parent into the house, her eyes scanning for the children. She asked detailed, invasive questions and grew agitated if denied entry. The most unsettling reports described her having an unnatural, almost mannequin-like stillness, with a voice that was flat and devoid of true human emotion. As quickly as she appeared, she would vanish, leaving no trace and no record with any actual Child Protective Services agency. The descriptions were so uniform, from the dark suit to the cold demeanor, that it seemed impossible for one person to be responsible. The phenomenon was reported in multiple states, from Texas to Michigan to the Carolinas, creating a wave of panic among parents. Law enforcement was baffled. The leading theory was that this was a sophisticated kidnapping ring using the guise of authority to gain access to children, yet no arrests were ever made and no attempted abductions were successfully linked to the phantom visitor. Another darker theory suggested this was the work of a cult, systematically scouting for victims as part of a twisted ritual, but the consistency and the sheer geographic spread of the reports made this seem logistically improbable. This left a far more unsettling possibility. Some researchers of the paranormal began to wonder if this was something other than human. They speculated that these entities were not trying to take children in the physical sense, but were feeding on the intense emotional energy of terror and protective fury they created. The phantom social worker never used force, only psychological pressure, as if the fear itself was the entire point. Was this a modern manifestation of an ancient archetype, the fairy or the shapeshifter, updated to wear a suit and carry a clipboard instead of lurking in a forest? The phenomenon eventually faded away as mysteriously as it began, leaving behind a legacy of profound unease. It demonstrated that the most terrifying threats are not those that break down your door, but those that politely knock, armed with the authority to shatter your world with a few carefully chosen words. What does it say about our fears when the monster no longer needs fangs, but only a badge and a lie, while the phantom social worker exploited modern fears? A legendary naval experiment from the same era claimed to weaponize reality itself. In the midst of the Second World War, the United States Navy was desperately seeking any technological advantage. According to a persistent conspiracy theory, this search led to a secret project in the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, an attempt to make a warship completely undetectable to enemy radar and sonar. The vessel at the center of this storm was the USS Eldridge, a Cannon-class destroyer escort. The story goes that on a day in October of 1943, scientists activated massive electronic generators on the ship's deck. Instead of just bending radar waves, the experiment went catastrophically further. Witnesses reportedly saw a thick green fog envelop the Eldridge before the entire ship. All 1,200 tons of steel vanished from the Philadelphia harbor. It did not just disappear from sight, it was said to have been instantly teleported over 200 miles away, appearing for several minutes in the Norfolk, Virginia Naval Yard before blinking back into existence at its original dock. If the story ended there, it would be an incredible tale of scientific breakthrough, but the true horror was waiting on board. When the Eldridge rematerialized, the crew had suffered unimaginable consequences. Some sailors were found driven completely insane, babbling in terror. Others were horrifically fused with the ship's very structure, their bodies merged into solid steel bulkheads and deck plates, still alive and screaming. Survivors were said to be prone to spontaneously bursting into flames or fading in and out of visibility for the rest of their lives. The official explanation, of course, is that the entire event is a complete fabrication. The Navy has consistently denied any such experiment ever took place, pointing to the Eldridge's own logs, which placed the ship in a completely different location at the time. Skeptics trace the origins of the story to a single man, Carl Meredith Allen, who used the pseudonym Carlos Allende. In the 1950s, Allen began sending a series of rambling letters to a writer and astronomer named Morris Jessup, claiming to have witnessed the event firsthand from a nearby merchant ship. He provided vivid, disturbing details, but never any verifiable proof. His account was a chaotic mix of technical-sounding jargon about Einstein's unified field theory and wild descriptions of supernatural horror. So why has this bizarre story endured for decades? The Philadelphia experiment taps into a deep-seated anxiety about the hidden cost of technological progress. It is a cautionary tale about the military-industrial complex pushing science into realms it cannot control, with the crew as the tragic human sacrifice. The story's enduring power lies in that terrifying image of men fused into metal, a permanent monument to an experiment that went too far. It forces us to wonder what other secrets might be buried in classified files, and what price we are truly willing to pay for an invisible warship. Carlos Allende's fantastic letters to Morris Jessup were more than just ramblings. They were seed planted in fertile ground, a story so perfectly tailored to the anxieties of the Cold War that it took on a life of its own. Allende wove two of the greatest scientific minds of the age into his tale, claiming that the Philadelphia experiment was the practical application of lost research by Nikola Tesla and Albert Einstein. By linking his story to these iconic figures, he gave his wild claims a veneer of scientific plausibility, suggesting that the government was hiding not just a terrible weapon, but the very secrets of the universe. The story's appeal exploded, fueled by a public increasingly distrustful of official narratives. It became the ultimate government cover-up story, a perfect blend of advanced science and grotesque horror. The Navy's repeated denials and their release of the Eldridge's mundane service records did nothing to slow the momentum. For believers, the official rebuttals were simply proof of a successful conspiracy, an attempt to bury a catastrophic failure. The myth proved incredibly adaptable, inspiring countless books, a major motion picture, and even episodes of popular television shows. It provided a foundational blueprint for an entire genre of conspiracy lore, from secret Nazi bases in Antarctica to stories of reverse-engineered alien technology at Area 51. Its core warning resonated deeply, that our own pursuit of power could tear a hole in reality itself. How does a story with no factual basis become so entrenched in our culture? The Philadelphia experiment endures not because it is true, but because it feels true. It gives a terrifying, science-fictional shape to our very real fears about invisible forces, unchecked authority, and the human cost of technological hubris. We are left to wonder if some legends are born not from events, but from the dark potential we sense in ourselves. Deep within the quiet halls of the Field Museum in Chicago rests an artifact that seems to defy the very idea of a peaceful afterlife. It is a beautifully painted coffin lid, known as the Unlucky Mummy, and its journey from an Egyptian tomb to an American museum is paved with stories of tragedy and dread. The lid once covered the mummy of a priestess named Amen-Ra, and it was acquired by the museum in the late 19th century, a time when wealthy collectors eagerly scooped up ancient treasures. Almost immediately, whispers of a curse began to circulate. The tale goes that a series of misfortunes befell everyone involved in transporting the artifact. A businessman who helped broker the deal reportedly lost his entire fortune. A photographer who took pictures of the coffin lid was said to have met with a sudden, fatal accident soon after. These stories piled up, creating a narrative of supernatural revenge, as if the spirit of the priestess was violently objecting to her disturbance. The curse seemed to follow the object across the ocean, embedding itself in its new home and leaving a permanent chill in the air. What force could linger on a piece of wood for thousands of years, waiting to strike? The museum itself, a temple of science and reason, became an unlikely stage for these eerie events. Staff members reported strange occurrences in the Egyptian exhibit, particularly after hours. Security guards walking their rounds would hear faint whispers emanating from the display case. Motion sensors would trigger without any visible cause, and the distinct, heavy scent of perfume or incense would sometimes fill the air around the Unlucky Mummy, a fragrance with no logical source. The most chilling accounts came from those who claimed to have seen the painted eyes on the coffin lid seem to follow them as they moved through the gallery. This was not a ghost that rattled chains, but a presence that felt ancient, watchful, and deeply displeased. The stories grew so persistent that some museum employees reportedly refused to be alone in the same room with the artifact, a powerful testament to the fear it inspired. How does a scientific institution reconcile measurable data with the persistent, personal experiences of its own staff? Skeptics, of course, have a far more worldly explanation for the curse. They point to the power of suggestion, a psychological phenomenon where expecting something to happen makes you more likely to perceive it. Once the story of the Unlucky Mummy was established, any minor misfortune, from a stubbed toe to a failed business deal, could be retroactively linked to the artifact. The strange sounds and smells in a vast, old building could be attributed to faulty plumbing, air currents, or the power of a vivid imagination. They argue that we are pattern-seeking creatures, and a curse provides a simple, dramatic narrative for the random bad luck that is simply part of life. Yet, this rational view cannot completely erase the lingering question. Why did this specific artifact, among thousands of others, gather such a dense and enduring cloud of dark folklore? The Unlucky Mummy remains a permanent resident of the museum, its painted gaze a silent challenge to our modern sensibilities, reminding us that some stories are far too compelling to be dismissed by facts alone. The Unlucky Mummy's curse was a story whispered across an ocean, but a different kind of terror was taking root in an American suburb, one that would become the foundation for our modern vision of pure evil. In 1949, a 13-year-old boy living in Maryland and Washington, see, became the center of a case so disturbing it was kept secret for decades. It began subtly with odd scratching sounds inside the walls of his family's home. Then the boy's bed would shake violently in the night. Family members reported hearing heavy footsteps pacing in empty hallways and witnessing furniture slide across the floor as if pushed by an invisible hand. These poltergeist-like events soon escalated into something far more personal and cruel. The boy, referred to in church documents as Roland Doe, began to speak in a guttural, rasping voice that was not his own. Deep, bloody scratches would materialize on his skin, spelling out words and symbols. Perhaps the most chilling claim from witnesses was that the boy would levitate, his body rising from the mattress as if weightless, while holy objects placed in the room were reportedly flung from the walls. His family, devout Lutherans, sought help from their own church first, but when their pastors found themselves powerless, they turned in desperation to the Roman Catholic Church. After extensive observation, priests concluded they were witnessing a genuine case of demonic possession, and the Vatican granted special permission for a series of exorcism rites to be performed. The rites were long, brutal, and psychologically harrowing for everyone involved. The presiding priests reported that the boy exhibited supernatural strength, speaking in ancient languages he could not possibly know, and recoiling violently from the touch of sacred objects. The struggle to reclaim the boy's soul was a weeks-long battle, moving between his home and a hospital in St. Louis, with the entity within him seeming to mock and resist the ancient prayers at every turn. The official Catholic records remained sealed, but the story eventually leaked, captivating a young writer named William Peter Blatty. This real-life account became the direct inspiration for his blockbuster novel, and later the iconic film, The Exorcist. It forces a deeply unsettling question: were these events a true confrontation with a malevolent, non-human intelligence, or a tragic and extreme manifestation of psychological trauma given form by powerful religious belief? This case stands at the terrifying intersection of faith and fear, leaving us to wonder which is more powerful, the force that possesses, or the belief that can cast it out. Father William Bowdern entered a room thick with a presence that defied all reason. His mission was to perform the ancient rite of exorcism on a boy known as Roland Doe, a ritual that would stretch over weeks and become a grueling marathon of faith against a seemingly intelligent evil. The ceremonies were not a single event, but a series of intense, exhausting sessions, often conducted late into the night. Father Bowdern, a Jesuit priest, was assisted by another Jesuit and a seminarian, creating a small, dedicated team fighting a battle few could comprehend. They followed the Roman ritual, a centuries-old Catholic text prescribing specific prayers, commands, and the use of sacred objects like holy water and crucifixes. The goal was not to scare a ghost, but to command a demonic entity to reveal its name and leave the innocent child forever. The physical toll was immense. The boy, restrained for his own safety, exhibited a strength that was simply not human. He would contort his body into impossible positions, hissing and snarling in a voice that was a gravelly, ancient rasp. The entity within him spat vile profanity and blasphemies, mocking the priests and their faith. Most chillingly, it seemed to know intimate details about the clerics' own lives, using personal information as a weapon to shatter their resolve. Deep, bleeding scratches would appear on the boy's skin, forming words and symbols, as if an invisible claw was etching its hatred into his flesh. Throughout this ordeal, the church did not operate in a vacuum. Psychiatrists were consulted, their role to rule out any natural, mental illness that could explain the horrors. They found no diagnosis that could account for the boy speaking Latin, a language he had never studied, or his violent physical reactions to sacred objects alone. This collaboration between faith and science only deepened the mystery. The psychologists could document the symptoms, but they could not explain the cause. The case of Roland Doe became the foundational blueprint for every modern story of possession precisely because it was so thoroughly documented by both religious and medical observers. The specific manifestations witnessed in that room, the levitating bed, the projectile vomiting, the head spinning, and the profound desecration of the sacred were not invented for a movie. They were reported by multiple, credible witnesses and became the core elements William Peter Blatty would later weave into his novel. This real-life struggle created the archetype we all recognize today. Why does this specific template of horror, born in a quiet American home, resonate so powerfully across cultures? It taps into the ultimate violation, the loss of self, and presents a battle for the soul that is both spiritual and terrifyingly physical. The story of Roland Doe forces a difficult choice. Do you believe it was a tragic case of misunderstood psychosis, or was it a genuine glimpse into a war happening just beyond our sight? The line between a haunting and an invasion became terrifyingly blurred on a warm Kentucky night in August 1955. At the Sutton family farmhouse near the small town of Hopkinsville, an evening of casual conversation was shattered by a frantic knock at the door. The family dog was going wild, barking at something in the darkness. When young Billy Ray Taylor went to investigate, he rushed back inside with a wild story. He claimed he had seen a shimmering silver craft silently descend into a nearby gully on the property. The adults dismissed his tale as an overactive imagination, but their skepticism would not last the night. Soon they all saw them, appearing at the windows and peering inside with calm, unsettling curiosity were creatures unlike anything they had ever imagined. They were small, barely 3 feet tall, with slender limbs and massive, round ears. Their heads were disproportionately large, balanced on thin necks, and their eyes glowed with a faint, yellowish light. Most startling of all was their skin, which appeared to be a luminous, metallic silver. The family's initial shock quickly turned to sheer panic. These were not ghosts or demons from an old storybook. These were tangible beings, and they were surrounding the home. Convinced they were under attack, the men of the household grabbed their rifles. What followed was a surreal and prolonged firefight that would stretch on for nearly 4 hours. The Suttons would later describe firing at the creatures from point-blank range, only to watch in disbelief as the bullets seemed to have no effect. The lead would hit the silvery bodies with a loud, metallic ping, like a stone hitting a hollow kettle, and the beings would simply tumble backwards before righting themselves and scurrying away into the shadows with an odd, floating gait. They seemed completely invulnerable. At one point, one of the creatures perched on a low tree branch, and a family member shot it directly. It merely did a backflip off the branch, landed on its feet, and scampered off. The family's terror reached a peak when the things began to actively approach the house, their glowing eyes visible in the dark. They would float up to peer into windows and even climb onto the roof. The Suttons, armed and desperate, felt like they were trapped in a nightmare, defending their home from an enemy that could not be stopped. When the sun finally began to rise, the siege ended as abruptly as it began. The creatures vanished, exhausted and terrified. The entire family piled into their cars and sped to the Hopkinsville police station to report the impossible. The response from law enforcement was swift and thorough. Sheriff Russell Greenwell and his deputies arrived at the farmhouse expecting to find evidence of a drunken prank or a mass hallucination. Instead, they found a scene of genuine chaos. The ground outside the home was littered with spent shell casings. There were strange, luminescent patches on the grass and trees where the creatures had been seen. Most compellingly, the police noted that the entire family, from the hardened war veterans to the children, was genuinely, profoundly terrified. Their stories matched in every detail, and their fear was palpable and real. No hoax was ever uncovered, and no logical explanation, from misidentified owls to a case of mass hysteria, has ever fully accounted for the physical evidence, the spent bullets, or the sheer, consistent terror of that 4-hour battle. The Hopkinsville Goblins case stands as one of the most bizarre and well-documented close encounter stories in American history, not of a distant light in the sky, but of a direct, physical confrontation with something utterly unknown. It presents a chilling scenario where the monsters are not only real, but they are also completely bulletproof. A family of terrified witnesses and a yard littered with spent bullet casings presented a puzzle that law enforcement could not easily dismiss. The credibility of the Suttons and their friends became the cornerstone of this baffling case. These were not fringe believers, but solid, working-class people, including 2 veterans who knew how to handle firearms and assess a threat. Their consistent, detailed accounts, given separately to the police, held up under intense scrutiny. There were no major contradictions in their story, and their palpable, genuine fear convinced the initial investigators that they were reporting a real, traumatic event, not orchestrating a hoax. So if the witnesses were credible, what did they actually see that night? The most popular natural explanation points to a case of mistaken identity, with the great horned owl as the prime suspect. These large, formidable birds can appear eerily humanoid when perched on a branch, with their tall, tufted ears and large, forward-facing eyes that can reflect light with a yellowish glow. In the darkness and the heat of panic, could a family have misinterpreted a territorial standoff with a group of owls, seeing monstrous, silvery beings instead of angered birds? Proponents of this theory suggest the loud ping of the bullets could have been shots ricocheting off distant trees or rocks, with the perceived invulnerability being a trick of shadow and adrenaline. Yet this explanation struggles under the weight of the testimony. The witnesses described firing at the creatures from mere feet away, watching them tumble and then float away. An owl hit by a rifle shot at close range would not simply right itself and scamper off. The reported duration of the event, nearly 4 hours, also seems excessive for a panic over misidentified wildlife. Another layer of mystery is the utter lack of a classic UFO component. Despite Billy Ray Taylor's initial claim of a silver craft, no other family member reported seeing it, and no physical evidence of a landing was ever found. This separates Hopkinsville from most other close encounters where the object in the sky is the central focus. Here, the emphasis was entirely on the creatures themselves, making it less a story about a spacecraft and more a story about a siege by impossible terrestrial beings. This is precisely why the case endures as a classic of the absurd. It presents a scenario that feels both primitive and alien, a frontier-style shootout against enemies that defy the basic rules of physics and biology. The Hopkinsville Goblins case resists every easy classification, leaving us with a choice between a mass hallucination of unprecedented detail or a confrontation with something for which we have no name. It stands as a monument to the idea that the truly unknown does not always arrive in a ship. Sometimes it simply crawls out of the gully behind your home. The Hopkinsville siege was a battle against tangible monsters, but some vanishings offer no enemy to fight, only a sudden and impossible void. In 1880, a farmer named David Lang was walking across a sun-drenched field on his property in Gallatin, Tennessee. His wife and 2 children were watching from the porch of their farmhouse, and 2 friends were approaching in a horse-drawn buggy along the nearby road. They all saw David, a man in the prime of his life, strolling through the tall grass. Then, in the middle of a single step, he vanished. He did not stumble into a hole or fall behind a rise in the land. One moment he was there, a solid figure against the green earth, and the next moment he was simply gone, as if he had been erased from existence. The witnesses on the porch screamed. The men in the buggy whipped their horses forward, convinced their eyes were deceiving them. They all converged on the exact spot where David had disappeared, a patch of ground that looked no different from any other. They called his name, their voices growing more frantic as the silence stretched out. They searched the entire field, stamping down the grass, looking for any hidden crevice or sinkhole that could have swallowed him. They found nothing. The search expanded over the following days, involving neighbors and local law enforcement. They combed every inch of the property, drained a small pond, and even used probing rods to search for soft earth. No trace of David Lang was ever found. It was as if he had been plucked from the world by an unseen hand. The legend grew from that empty patch of ground. People claimed that a perfect circle of barren earth soon formed where he had vanished, a spot where no grass or weed would ever grow again. The most haunting part of the tale involved his children. For years after the disappearance, his son and daughter would sometimes return to that cursed circle in the field. They claimed that on quiet days, they could faintly hear their father's voice, calling out for help as if from a great and impossible distance. his cries emanating from the empty air itself. Was this a case of spontaneous teleportation, a doorway to another dimension opening for just a split second? Could the ground itself have opened and then sealed shut without a trace, defying all known geology? Skeptics have long argued that the entire story is a work of pure fiction, a newspaper hoax that took on a life of its own. Indeed, the first known publication of the David Lang story appeared in a Strange Tales magazine decades after the alleged event, with no contemporary news reports to back it up. The author later admitted it was a piece of fiction, yet the story had already rooted itself deeply in local lore. The power of the David Lang story lies in its brutal simplicity. It presents a mystery with no physical evidence, no monster, and no resolution, only the chilling testimony of witnesses who saw a man cease to be. It forces us to question the stability of the world beneath our feet and the air we breathe. How fragile is our presence here if a single step can be the difference between being and nothingness? The truth about David Lang's disappearance is that it never happened at all. This entire haunting tale was a complete fabrication, first published in 1953 in a magazine called Fate, a publication dedicated to stories of the strange and unexplained. The author, a writer named Joe Mulholland, later admitted he had invented the story, crafting it from whole cloth. There was no David Lang, no farm in Gallatin, and no witnesses watching a man evaporate into the Tennessee air. Yet, despite its fictional origins, the story embedded itself so deeply in popular culture that it is still repeated today as a genuine, unsolved mystery. How does a lie become accepted as truth? The journey of the Lang story reveals a fascinating blueprint for the creation of modern folklore. It began with a simple, powerful premise, a man vanishing in plain sight, a concept so viscerally frightening that it bypasses our logical minds and speaks directly to our most primal fear of simply ceasing to exist. The story was then dressed in the clothing of fact, with specific details about the family, the farm, and the distraught children hearing their father's ghostly cries. These intimate, emotional details made the narrative feel personal and real, even though every element was invented. Once such a story enters circulation, it takes on a life of its own. It gets repeated in books about the paranormal, featured on television shows, and shared across campfires and internet forums. With each retelling, the line between fact and fiction blurs a little more until the original source is forgotten and the tale is accepted as a piece of local history. This process is fueled by a deep psychological need. Stories of people vanishing into thin air tap into a fundamental human anxiety about the fragility of our existence. They challenge our belief in a stable, predictable world where people do not simply disappear without a trace. These narratives give a shape to our fear of the random and the unknown, transforming an abstract dread into a concrete, if fictional, event. They also offer a strange kind of comfort, providing a simple, supernatural explanation for the agonizing mystery of a missing person, which in reality often involves far more tragic and mundane causes. The persistence of the David Lang story and others like it shows us that folklore is not a relic of the past. It is a living, breathing process that continues today, where a compelling story, regardless of its truth, can satisfy a deep-seated human need for mystery and meaning. We are left to wonder how many other modern legends are walking among us, their fictional roots completely forgotten, waiting for the next curious mind to uncover their origins. A new kind of fear began driving through American suburbs in the spring of 1981. It arrived not in a spaceship or a haunted farmhouse, but in a nondescript van, and its herald was a figure straight from a carnival nightmare. Across the country, from the East Coast to the sprawling cities of the Midwest, children started reporting terrifying encounters with phantom clowns. These were not the happy entertainers of birthday parties. They were sinister, silent figures who would beckon to children from their vehicles, sometimes brandishing weapons or offering candy, other times simply giving chase. The reports began piling up in rapid succession, creating a nationwide wave of panic that seemed to move faster than any single van could possibly travel. In Boston, children described a clown trying to lure them with treats. In Pittsburgh, a clown was seen wielding a long, sharp knife. In Kansas City, a clown in a red and white suit chased a group of boys, his van screeching around suburban corners. The pattern was eerily consistent, a shared nightmare unfolding in dozens of separate communities. The media seized upon the story, and the frenzy exploded. Local news broadcasts led with warnings about the mysterious clowns, their reports often amplifying the fear. Newspapers printed breathless accounts from frightened children, detailing the colors of the clowns' outfits and the models of their vans. This constant, sensational coverage created a powerful feedback loop. Every news segment about a clown sighting in one city seemed to spawn a dozen new reports in another. Soon it became impossible to tell where a genuine threat ended and a copycat prank or a case of mass hysteria began. Schoolyards were buzzing with rumors, and parents kept their children indoors, their eyes nervously scanning the streets for any sign of a strange vehicle or a painted face. The police were inundated with calls, launching investigations that often led to dead ends or the apprehension of harmless pranksters. The sheer scale and speed of the phenomenon pointed to something more complex than a simple crime spree. How could a single group of perpetrators be in so many places at once? What kind of organization could coordinate such a widespread campaign of terror without a single clear motive or a single arrest for a major crime? The theories that emerged were as bizarre as the events themselves. The most logical explanation pointed to a coordinated prank, perhaps orchestrated by college students or a fraternity that spun wildly out of control, feeding on the media attention it generated. Skeptics argued for a textbook case of mass hysteria where a few initial, perhaps misinterpreted, events were amplified by fear and sensational news reporting, causing children to see monsters in the faces of ordinary delivery drivers or construction workers. But a more chilling, less definable theory also took root. Some researchers of the paranormal wondered if this was a modern example of a phenomenon known as a phantom attacker. Throughout history, there have been waves of reports about mysterious figures like the phantom gasser of Mattoon or the spring-heeled Jack of Victorian England, who terrorize communities without ever leaving physical evidence. These entities seem to feed on the collective fear they generate, appearing just long enough to spark a panic before dissolving back into legend. Were the phantom clowns a manifestation of some deep societal anxiety, a shared monster conjured from the cultural subconscious? The clown, after all, is a figure that already exists in a strange space between comedy and terror, its painted smile hiding its true intentions. The wave of phantom clowns receded as quickly as it arrived, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and a permanent shift in how we view a once innocent symbol. It demonstrated that a monster does not need fangs or claws to bring a nation to a standstill. Sometimes, all it needs is a painted face and an empty promise, proving that the most potent fears are the ones we create for ourselves. A simple wine cabinet listed on eBay would become one of the most infamous haunted objects in the world. In 2003, a university student from Missouri named Kevin Mannies posted the item for sale. He was an aspiring writer and a skeptic, but he included a story with the listing that he could not explain. He claimed he had purchased the box from a grandmother who had survived the Holocaust, and she pleaded with him never to open it. Inside, he found 2 lockets of hair, a small statue, a dried rose, and 3 pennies dated to the 1920s. Almost immediately after taking it home, his life was plunged into chaos. The air around the box turned ice cold. Everyone in his apartment began suffering from violently disturbing nightmares, all featuring the same terrifying image of an old, haggard witch standing over their beds. His mother, visiting one day, suffered a massive stroke mere moments after being near the cabinet. Convinced the object was cursed, Mannies sold it, explicitly warning the new buyer about its dark history. The box then began its eerie journey from owner to owner, leaving a trail of similar misfortunes in its wake. The next owner, a Missouri man named Iosif Nietsk, purchased it online. He was soon plagued by waking nightmares and a constant, suffocating feeling of being watched. He He reported his hair began falling out in clumps, and he was diagnosed with a debilitating brain tumor. Desperate, he sold the box to a college student named Jason Haxton, the director of a museum of osteopathic medicine. Haxton, a man of science, thought the stories were superstition. He was wrong. Almost instantly, he was besieged by health problems, breaking out in oozing hives and coughing up blood. He experienced the same shared nightmares of the old hag and witnessed dark shadows moving through his home. The final straw was when his young daughter, visiting for the weekend, pointed to a corner of the room and asked, "Daddy, who is the dark man standing over there?" Haxton, now a true believer, sought the help of rabbis to understand what he was facing. They identified the force within the box as a Dybbuk, a concept from Jewish folklore. A Dybbuk is not a ghost, but a restless, disembodied human spirit, often one that has committed terrible sins in life. It is a malicious entity that clings to the living, seeking to possess a body to complete its unfinished business. This was not a random haunting, but a targeted spiritual attack. Following the rabbi's instructions, Haxton performed a specific ritual to seal the Dybbuk inside the box using a beeswax candle and Hebrew prayers. He then locked the container inside a larger, iron-banded chest and hid it in a secret, secure location, hoping to end its reign of terror forever. The story, however, was too powerful to be contained. It inspired a major Hollywood film and spawned countless replicas, each claiming to carry a fragment of the original's dark energy. This raises a profound question about the nature of such objects. Is the Dybbuk box a genuine vessel for a malevolent spirit, its power so potent it can affect person after person? Or is it a perfect storm of psychological suggestion where the power of a terrifying story, once believed, makes people see curses in their own bad luck and nightmares? The box journey forces us to wonder if some objects become haunted not by what is inside them, but by the terrifying stories we attach to them, creating a feedback loop of fear that becomes, in its own way, very real. That sealed chest, however, could not contain the story. The terrifying account of the Dybbuk box found its way to Hollywood, where it was purchased by a producer and became the direct inspiration for the successful film franchise, The Possession. This brought the legend to an audience of millions, transforming a private nightmare into a shared cultural touchstone. The movie presented a polished, dramatic version of the events, but its existence raised a critical question for skeptics. Was the entire story merely a clever marketing ploy, a fabricated backstory designed to generate buzz for a horror film? The timeline is indeed murky, with key details about the box's origins and its early owners difficult to verify independently. Kevin Mannies, the first owner, is a creative writer, a fact that leads some to wonder if the entire tale was an elaborate piece of fiction from the very start. This uncertainty is the heart of the modern paranormal mystery, where a good story can become real simply through the act of being told and retold. The power of suggestion is the true force behind the Dybbuk box's curse. When a person believes they are in possession of a malevolent object, their mind becomes incredibly susceptible. A common nightmare becomes proof of a supernatural assault. A string of bad luck is no longer random chance, but the direct result of a curse. A child's active imagination, seeing a shadow in a dark room, becomes a sighting of a dark entity. The brain, seeking patterns, connects these unrelated events into a single, terrifying narrative. This psychological phenomenon does not make the fear any less real for those experiencing it. The hives, the nightmares, the sense of dread, these are all genuine physical and emotional responses triggered by a powerful belief. The Dybbuk box is a perfect example of an internet-age cursed object. Its legend was born on eBay and spread through early online forums, moving at the speed of a click. It is a digital ghost story, a meme of terror that transcends geography. Unlike the Bell Witch or the Amityville Horror, which are tied to specific locations, the Dybbuk box is portable. Its curse is not in the land, but in the story attached to it, a story that can be emailed, shared, and replicated endlessly. Countless copies of the box now exist, each one a potential vessel for the same powerful suggestion. This forces us to confront a strange, new reality. In our connected world, a curse does not need a demon to be effective. It only needs a believable story and an audience willing to suspend its disbelief. So, is the Dybbuk Box a haunted object or a hollow vessel we have filled with our own deepest fears? The answer may be that in the 21st century, there is no meaningful difference. These stories form a tapestry of the truly bizarre, woven from threads of fear, mystery, and the unknown. From winged omens and alien abductions to cursed objects and vanishing farmers, these American legends share a common core of profound absurdity. They defy every law of physics and biology, presenting scenarios so irrational they challenge our fundamental understanding of reality. Yet their power does not come from their plausibility, but from the deep, primal chords they strike within us. A man disappearing mid-step, a creature that cannot be harmed by bullets, an invisible force that can kill, these are nightmares given form. They tap into our fear of the dark, our anxiety about forces beyond our control, and the terrifying possibility that the world is not as orderly or as safe as we pretend. Whether these tales are fact, fiction, or a potent mixture of both is almost beside the point. Their endurance proves that we are a species hungry for mystery. We need stories that remind us that the map of the known world still has blank spaces, territories marked only by the words, "Here be monsters." These legends are our modern folklore, cautionary tales for a technological age that still feels the chill of a cold spot in a quiet room. They force us to question what we think we know and to wonder what might be lurking just beyond the edge of the porch light. So what about your own corner of the world? Every town has its own strange tale, its own local legend whispered about for generations. What is the most bizarre, unexplained story from your hometown? Share your own piece of the mystery in the comments below, and let's keep the map of the unknown growing.